I first noticed this window when I was 9. We'd just moved to this neighborhood, gray, with identical panel houses and narrow courtyards that always smelled of damp and rust. Our balcony overlooked an old 3-story building across the street. It didn't fit in with the rest of the neighborhood, darkened brick, peeling frames, crooked balconies, as if the house had once tried to be beautiful but changed its mind. And one window, third from the left on the top floor. It always had a light on. Not almost always. Not often. Always. Morning, afternoon, night. In the rain. In the snow. Even when the entire neighborhood was plunged into darkness due to power outages, the window continued to glow, a soft, warm, yellowish light that didn't resemble a lamp. At first, I thought some crazy person lived there. Maybe he's afraid of the dark, I told my mother when I showed her the window. She glanced briefly, and then looked away. "Don't look," she said too sharply. "Just don't look." Back then, I didn't understand why adults were so afraid of simple things. I watched. Every evening, while doing my homework by the window, I'd catch a glimpse of that light out of the corner of my eye. Sometimes, it seemed like someone was moving inside. A shadow would pass by, as if someone were walking across the room. Sometimes it would stop right at the glass. But no matter how hard I peered, I could never make out a face. One day, I took the plunge and asked my neighbor, an old man on the first floor who always smoked by the entrance. "What window is that?" I asked, pointing to the house across the street. He froze, a cigarette at his lips. "Which window?" "Where there's always light." He slowly exhaled smoke. "Boy," he said, not looking at me, "if you want to live normally in this neighborhood, pretend that window isn't there." That night, I couldn't sleep for a long time. It seemed as if the light from that window was filtering through the walls and falling right on my face. And at some point, I realized. I felt like I was being seen from there. I grew up, but the window didn't. The house across the street remained just as crooked and dark, as if time had passed it by. But I left, went to university, then returned. And that's when I realized that the window had been burning all this time. When I saw it again almost 15 years later, I felt uneasy. The light was the same, neither dimmer nor brighter. The same even, warm, unnatural light that couldn't be mistaken for an ordinary lamp. I rented an apartment in the same building where I lived as a child. I simply had no other options. I was almost broke, and the landlord agreed to a ridiculous price. I got a small room with a view of that same building. That very first night, I caught myself standing by the window, just like I did as a child, staring at the glowing rectangle across the street. Sometimes there was a silhouette there. The person sat at the table. Sometimes they stood up. Sometimes they walked up to the glass. But the strangest thing was, they never left the room. The light never went out. The shadow never disappeared. I tried to convince myself that someone strange simply lived there, someone who worked at night or suffered from insomnia. But there was something about their movements. They were too smooth, too slow, as if the person there never tired. Never. One day, when I stared too long, the silhouette suddenly stopped and raised its head. They were looking straight into my window. I couldn't make out his face, but I knew for sure. He was looking at me. I recoiled, my heart pounding, as if I'd been caught doing something forbidden. That night, I dreamed I was standing in that room, by that window, looking at myself sleeping in my bed. A few days after that dream, I began noticing strange coincidences. Every time I approached the window, a silhouette in the illuminated room across the street seemed to be waiting for me. It didn't turn around, it was already facing my house. Sometimes it seemed like it was smiling, though I still couldn't see its face. One night, I decided to test myself. I stepped back from the window, hid behind the wall, and counted to 10. Then I suddenly peered out. The silhouette was still looking where I'd been a second ago, as if it knew where I was. Not where I am, but where I'd been. A cold sweat broke out on me. The next day, I found an old woman in the yard. She was walking her small dog and had lived there, according to her, since construction. I asked her about the house across the street. She froze when I mentioned the glowing window. There used to be a family there, she said after a long pause. Very quiet people. But then something happened. No one saw them again. They went into the apartment. It was empty. But the light was still on. Didn't they turn off the electricity? She looked at me as if I'd said something terribly naive. The wiring's been gone for a long time, boy. That night, I didn't close the curtains. I watched, and for the first time, I saw a silhouette slowly raise its hand and place its palm on the glass from the inside. Exactly at the moment when, without realizing it, I placed my palm on the glass from the outside. There was only a thin layer of air and 2 windows between us, and I realized he could sense me. After that night, I could no longer pretend everything was normal. Sometimes I woke up with the feeling that someone was looking straight into my eyes. Not from the room, not from the hallway, but from somewhere further away, through the walls, through the distance, from that glowing window. The light began to change. Before, it had simply been warm. Now it seemed to move, as if something were slowly flowing inside it, like a thick liquid. Sometimes it seemed to pulse, as if breathing. The silhouette no longer always sat at the table. Sometimes it stood right by the window, sometimes very close to the glass. Too close. I began to notice that it was mimicking my movements. If I tilted my head, it did the same. If I retreated, it retreated too, but belatedly like an echo. But the most terrifying thing happened one evening when I turned off the light in my room. For the first time, I began to see not only it in the window, I began to see myself. My reflection overlapped his figure, and at some point I realized we were standing in identical poses, only he was on the other side. A terrible thought occurred to me. What if he isn't someone else? What if he is me? But from that room, that same night, I dreamed that I woke up in a strange apartment. Light was shining in my eyes. Outside the window was my house, and in one of the windows I saw a man. He was looking straight at me, and I realized he thought I was trapped. After that night, I could no longer pretend everything was normal. Sometimes I woke up with the feeling that someone was looking me straight in the eyes. Not from the room, not from the hallway, but from somewhere far away, through the walls, through the distance, from that glowing window. The light began to change. Before, it had simply been warm. Now it seemed to move, as if something were slowly flowing inside it like a thick liquid. Sometimes it seemed to pulse, as if breathing. The silhouette no longer always sat at the table. Sometimes it stood right by the window, sometimes very close to the glass. Too close. I began to notice that it was mimicking my movements. If I tilted my head, it did the same. If I retreated, it retreated too, but belatedly like an echo. But the most terrifying thing happened one evening when I turned off the light in my room. For the first time, I began to see not only him in the window, I began to see myself. My reflection overlapped his figure, and at some point I realized we were standing in identical positions, only he was on the other side. A terrible thought occurred to me. What if he isn't someone else? What if he is me? But from that room, that same night, I dreamed that I woke up in a strange apartment. Light was shining in my eyes. Outside the window was my house, and in one of the windows I saw a man. He was looking straight at me, and I realized he thought I was trapped. I was no longer sure where the dream ended and reality began. The light from that window was now everywhere. Even when I closed the curtains, it seemed to seep through the fabric, leaving pale yellow stains on the walls. At night, my room looked as if a lamp was on, even though I knew everything was off. I started hearing a sound. Quiet, rhythmic, like a fingernail scratching on glass. Every time it appeared, I knew. The silhouette was standing by the window. One day, I couldn't stand it anymore and went back to the old house. The front door was ajar, even though no one had lived there for a long time. Inside, it smelled of dust and something old like abandoned hospitals. Third floor, the apartment with that very window. The door was locked, but light shone through the cracks, as if something more than just a source was burning inside. I pressed my ear to the door, and I heard breathing, exactly like mine. I jumped back, my heart almost bursting out of my chest. At that moment, the light in the hallway of my house, the one where I lived, went out, and the light in that apartment grew brighter. My phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "You're almost here." And I realized the window wasn't just a window anymore. It had become a doorway. That night, I never returned home. I stood in the dark hallway of the old house, opposite the door with that same light shining through the cracks. It wasn't yellow anymore. It was almost white, painfully bright, as if there was no room behind the door, and the very concept of space was erased. My phone vibrated again. "You're tired of holding this side. Who are you?" I whispered, though I knew no one would answer out loud. The screen lit up. "I'm the one who stayed." I opened the door. Inside was the same room I'd seen hundreds of times. A table, a chair, a window, a light that had no source. It emanated from the air itself. And in the middle of the room stood I. Or rather, not quite me. His face was mine, but too smooth, too perfect, as if someone had been looking at me for a long time and trying to recreate me. "You're looking from that side," he said. His voice sounded like mine, but breathless. "And I'm looking from this side." Memories I shouldn't have suddenly surfaced in my head. How I've been sitting here for years, looking out the window. How I wait. How the light keeps me awake. How someone will surely look back someday. "You're the first in a long time," he said. "The first who hasn't looked away." The light around us grew stronger. I realized something terrible. This house isn't cursed. It's full. Someone must always be inside to keep the light from going out. "If you leave," I began. "The light will disappear," he finished. "And with it this side. But you're already connected to the window. You feel it." And he was right. I felt something pulling me toward the glass, toward the light, toward that point where the world becomes flat and infinite. "You can come back," he said softly. "But then I'll go there, and I'll look out your window." At that moment, I realized one of us will still remain. I don't remember making the choice. I only remember standing by the window, looking at my house, seeing a man in one of the windows. He stood in my room and looked straight at me. The light has become a part of me. Now I wait, because sooner or later, someone will look too long, and the window will want again to be noticed.